Marie-Clémentine Valadon was born on November the 23rd, 1865 in Bessines-sur-Gartempe, the daughter of an unknown father and Madeleine Valadon, a seamstress. In 1870 her mother left with her for Paris. In Paris they lived under siege during the war with Prussia, and then afterwards living in fear of the Commune. Madeleine works during the day as a housekeeper and in the evening takes in ironing work. She therefore has little time left to take care of her daughter, whom she entrusts first to a concierge, then to her adult daughter, and finally to the Saint Jean monastery in Montmartre. Marie-Clémentine will still take lessons in a religious school, but her naughtiness and lack of discipline are hard for her teachers to tolerate. In 1877 she left school and began to work by occupying several small jobs. She realizes her childhood dream by becoming a trapeze artist at the traveling circus Molière. But at 15, an unfortunate fall put an end to her career. She discovered instead a joy of drawing, which became a favorite hobby. It was on this occasion that she met the painter Puvis de Chavannes, whose model she became. She also poses for Renoir, who quickly becomes her lover. From 1881 she frequented the artistic milieu of Montmartre, where she quickly had several admirers. As an artist model, Suzanne became an active member of the bohemian community of Montmartre. She shortened her name to Maria and became a regular at the famed tavern La Pain Agile, as well as the early cabaret Le Chat Noir. During this time in her life, Suzanne made a name for herself as a feisty, vivacious girl, known for stunts such as sliding down the banister at a popular club while wearing only a mask. At 15, she began earning her living as an artist's model. The painters and sculptors mainly inhabited the Butte. Le Butte-aux-Cailles is a hilltop neighborhood of Paris, located in the southeastern 13th arrondissement. There was said to have been over 14,000 artists living and working there at that time. Naturally, there was a great demand for nude models, and Suzanne, bright blue eyes, long dark blonde hair, was very popular. The fact that most of her clients also became her lovers seemed to be part of the job profile. Whether it corresponded to her own sexual needs, as mostly depicted in the biographies, is to be doubted. Puvis de Chavannes, one of the first for whom she posed as a model at 15, was 56 years old at the time. At 17 she became pregnant, how could it be otherwise, and gave birth to her son, Maurice Utrillo. When, at the age of 17, she was expecting her son, who was born on December the 26th, 1883, she did not know who the father was. She was still earning her living as an artist's model. At that time she made drawings, especially portraits, in graphite, charcoal and red chalk. In 1890 she met Miquel Utrillo, a Catalan art critic. He became her lover, and Suzanne now started calling her son Maurice Utrillo Valadon. In 1891, after much contention, he agreed to sign papers declaring his paternity. She never identified him, though, as the biological father. While Maurice was primarily cared for by mother Madeleine, Suzanne continued her modeling career. The symbolist painter Puvis de Chavannes, Auguste Renoir and Toulouse-Lautrec all created portraits and nude paintings of her. What the painters didn't know was that Suzanne watched their fingers while they were working. She had long since taken up drawing herself, primarily realistic and unembellished depictions of people from her neighborhood, portraits of her mother, who had aged prematurely, studies of her son, rendered with a clear, strong stroke, the body mostly surrounded by a single dark contour line, which was later to be akin to a trademark in her paintings. In 1886, Marie Clementine and her mother moved to Rue de Tourlaque, in the house where Henri Toulouse-Lautrec rented a studio. Very quickly they get to know each other. She becomes his model as well as his mistress. She accompanies him everywhere during his nocturnal escapades. It was Toulouse-Lautrec who gave her the first name of Suzanne, because she posed naked for older painters. After discovering by chance some drawings made by Suzanne, he advises her to show them to Edgar Degas. Degas recognizes her talent, and Suzanne Valadon becomes his pupil and his protégée. All of Suzanne's early works were drawings executed in pencil or pastel. In the early 1890s she commenced working in oils, producing her first paintings. One of these first oils, dating from 1893, was of composer Eric Satie. Valadon and Satie had an intense though short-lived romantic involvement. Satie proposed to Valadon, but she turned him down. It was noted that, at that stage in her life, her love affairs seemed to pass over like fleeting sunshine. After the affair with Satie ended, Suzanne's involvement with Montmartre stockbroker Paul Moussis intensified, and the pair married in 1896. This marriage provided Suzanne with financial stability, enabling her to quit modeling and dedicate herself to drawing and painting full-time. After her marriage to Moussis waned, Suzanne left the city for a home in the country. Here she tried to balance her new duties as conventional wife with those of a working artist. In the late 1890s her artistic output was slow, and she made only a few sales, primarily to fellow artists. However, 2 of her engravings appeared at a large London show put on by the International Society of Painters, Sculptors and Engravers in 1898. This probably came about due to the encouragement and influence of Degas. Suzanne's son, Maurice, was starting to show signs of mental instability. He completed primary school outside of Paris, but as a teenager attended school in Montmartre. He did well with his studies, but began to develop a problem with alcohol. Suzanne turned her attention to her son's well-being, neglecting her fledgling artistic career. However, Maurice became progressively more unstable. In the early 1900s, Suzanne began encouraging Maurice to paint as a means of therapy. Maurice exhibited artistic talent, but it didn't stem the onslaught of schizophrenic episodes. In 1904, Maurice was committed to a mental hospital for treatment of alcoholism and other problems. Suzanne's affair with André Uta, her son's friend and fellow artist, who was 21 years younger than her, changed the lives of everyone involved. Suzanne broke up with her husband and threw herself into painting. In the following years she created her most important paintings, such as the scandalous paradise scene Adam and Eve, in which God's creations are shown nude in a landscape full of bright colors. This painting, modeled on Suzanne and her young lover, was the first piece executed by a female artist to show a nude man and woman together. As the relationship between Suzanne and Uta intensified, she tried at first to keep it secret from her husband. However, she became careless, and Moussis found out, ending the marriage. He officially divorced her in March of 1910. Life with Uta was very stimulating for Suzanne. For the first time, she enthusiastically visited museums and art exhibitions, traveled extensively, bringing back wonderful landscape paintings from every trip. The couple acquired a dilapidated chateau in Saint Bernard in eastern France, where she spent the summers with Uta and Maurice. Although Suzanne was regularly represented at the Salon exhibitions, and in 1923 was taken under permanent contract by the gallery Bernheim-Jeune, the family derived their main income from the sales of the works of Maurice. They led really quite a luxurious life, even keeping a chauffeur, housekeeper and maid. The Parisian street scenes that Maurice painted and skillfully marketed by André Uta sold so fast he could hardly keep up with the demand. Maurice is left in the chateau under the supervision of a concierge, while Suzanne and André return to Paris. Suzanne's work was now gaining some notice. A retrospective was organized. Then, in 1932, a major exhibition with a catalogue prefaced by Edouard Herriot. But the sales are pitiful. Maurice returns again to Paris under the supervision of his mother and his stepfather, but Suzanne's relationship with Uta is crumbling. Uta had taken up drinking and womanizing, and he abandons her to move into an attic room in Montmartre. In 1935 she was hospitalized following an acute attack of uremia, which left her in a state of exhaustion. It was during this period that the widow of a Belgian banker, Lucie Valor, came to keep Maurice company. Suzanne is worried about Maurice and wonders who will take care of him after her death. Lucie says that she is ready to marry him. The idea appeals to Suzanne at first. Then she begins to realize that the marriage would be the end of the comfortable lifestyle she has grown accustomed to. Uta, on learning the news, protested violently, but without result. Maurice Utrillo, who had become a Catholic in 1933, married Lucie 2 years later. Through the 1930s her health slowly declined. In the last decade of her life, Suzanne Valadon became a lonely figure. In the bistros she frequents regularly, she meets her last great friend, the painter Gazi. In her bold self-portrait with bare breasts, the 66-year-old shows herself with a clear streak of bitterness around her mouth, which has become decidedly narrower. As she ages, her production decreases. On April 7, 1938, Suzanne was painting at her easel when she unexpectedly suffered a stroke. She died at the hospital just hours later, at the age of 72. Maurice, seized with an anxiety attack, does not attend the funeral, which is organized by André Uta. Paintings, nearly 275 drawings and 31 etchings. This does not include many works destroyed or lost over the decades. For so many years after her death, Suzanne's recognition remained closely linked to her sons. However, in the latter part of the 20th century, increasing interest in the works of women artists, such as Suzanne, led to an increased appreciation of her life, art and contributions. Nature has me completely in its power. Trees, sky, water, and people touch me deeply and passionately. Shapes, colors, and movements inspire me to paint with love and fervor, to do justice to the things I hold dear. In my paintings there is not a single brushstroke, not a line that does not have its origin in nature. When I construct my canvases, I invent the forms, but nature is the yardstick against which I measure the veracity of my paintings, always inspired by my affection for life itself. My dear friends, I hope you enjoyed that presentation. What I really like about Suzanne Valadon's life is the fact how fate has pushed her in the direction of art. She came from a poor background. The father was not around. The mother had to work at ironing. She did too. And so she took up the nude modelling as a way to supplement the income. And although she had been drawing as a hobby during her childhood, she obviously would never have had the means, say, of someone like Degas, who had a rich family, a private income, to study art. This never would have been an option for her. But here she was, straight into a community of very, very talented artists, and she could actually study their techniques while being a model. She could see the materials they used, watch how they did things, watch how they mixed the paints, how they applied them, and from that, her own genius, her own talent unfolded. I love that. I love that sort of story. It's like she was meant to be an artist. But I do love the way it wasn't obvious to her from the start. It was something that developed, that was nurtured, and I do very much like her art. You can see that she had a great, great talent. And I do love her son's work. I have one of his prints hanging up in my workshop where it has hung for the last, since I've had that workshop. So yeah, about 23 years. It's been hanging there. Still, it's one of his street scenes. I'll put it up on the screen now so you know which one it is. And she obviously doted on him. She doted on her son. And I wonder how he felt years later that he was too nervous or this anxiety attack that prevented him from attending his own mother's funeral, which is rather tragic indeed. And she certainly lived during a wonderful era in art, in French art, with all these fabulous artists that she got to meet. Wouldn't you love to go back in time to be able to mingle with them in Montmartre and have a few aperitifs in the evening with them? You've heard me ramble on before about my time machine, the places and the eras that I would go to. If only. Yeah, it's a bit sad that it said that towards the end she had a lonely existence, but who's to say that it was? Maybe she enjoyed going to bistros and chatting with the locals. Yeah, I mean, I had read that from a website that she was lonely towards the end, but maybe that was the author's interpretation of her life at the end. Perhaps she wasn't lonely at all. She might have just been a solitary personality who didn't like, going out and being amongst large groups of people. I don't like it myself, I must admit. I want to soon bring your attention to an article that I found. Before I go to that article, the reason why I found the article that I'm going to show you was because I remember, now I think it was back in the late 80s or early 90s, I was in Australia and I read a newspaper report, and I read several about the same news article in different newspapers at the time, and I cannot find it anywhere. I've put in different keywords. I can't find it anywhere on the internet. The report was about an artist's model. She had been a model during the 1920s and 1930s for some of the most famous artists in Paris. Quite possibly the same ones that Suzanne Valadon had associated with. And she had modelled for them, and she had died at around this time when the article was printed. It was either the late 80s or early 90s. She had never married. She had an apartment in Paris, which was worth a fortune when she died. And in it, all these artists, by the way, had given her artworks of theirs, which she had kept all these decades. And when she died, she had no known family, no real friends around, and lawyers managed to track down some distant relative living in Spain. He didn't even know she existed, and he inherited the lot. But, as I say, I cannot find this story anywhere. If somebody knows of it, once this gets to YouTube in 1.5 years, if somebody knows about this story and can tell me her name, I would be very grateful. Anyway, let's get to this article that I found. Mind-boggling. That's all I'm going to say. Let's check it out. Okay, this is from the Smithsonian magazine from October 2021, titled "Artist Takes Museum's $84,000, Returns with Blank Canvases," titled "Take the Money and Run." Jens Harning says he has no plans to repay the Kunsten Museum of Modern Art, which expected him to incorporate the cash into a new artwork. This article is by Livia Gershon, Daily Correspondent. So, the museum has a written agreement that the money must be returned when the exhibition ends on January the 16th, 2022. But Harning says he has no plans to repay the cash. Well, he wouldn't, would he? When staff at the Kunstmuseum of Modern Art in Aalborg loaned artist Jens Harning 534,000 Danish kroner, the equivalent of $84,000, they expected him to create a new version of a previous artwork in which he framed a large amount of cash to illustrate the difference between annual income in Denmark and Austria. By the way, that was already done in Australia back in the 80s by the artist Brett Whiteley. I came into close contact with his work back then. He was also gluing on $100 notes to his art, so there's nothing new. Anyway, Harning came back to them with 2 blank canvases titled Take the Money and Run. I actually laughed as I saw it. Museum CEO Lasse Anderstens, well, he probably laughed because it wasn't his own money. Probably a government grant given to the museum. Here we go. Blah, blah, blah. So the artist himself says, the work is that I have taken their money, he says. You can't make this up, can you? Harning adds that he drew inspiration from the pay Kunsten offered for the artwork. Per Euronews, his contract included a display fee of $1,550 and reimbursement for expenses up to $6,960. Harning tells P1 he would have had to spend roughly $3,900 of his own money on the work. Well, considering he was given the equivalent of $84,000, $3,900 is not bad. I mean, if he had taken out those expenses, fair enough. So here we have these complete and utter nuggets staring at a blank canvas. Yeah, well, there's not too much I'm going to say about that. I'll tell you an interesting story similar to that later. I encourage other people, this is obviously the artist saying this, I encourage other people who have working conditions as miserable as mine to do the same, he says. If they are sitting on some job and not getting paid and are actually being asked to pay money to go to work, they should take what they can and run. But hang on, the museum said he could take his expenses out, didn't they? But now he's going to keep the whole amount. Well, I would love to know your input on that. It's more or less a performance piece. Well, that's interesting, isn't it? So every time that you renege on a contract, you can tell them it's a performance piece. I'll have to remember that one. Not that I would ever do such a dishonest action. There you go. I'll tell you my story quickly. A friend of mine who died earlier this year was a picture framer, and he told me once that he was stretching canvases for this local artist who was getting a lot of money for her work. She hadn't had time to paint the last painting for the exhibition, but she'd had the canvas primed. And then she had applied an impasto type of surface to it that she could paint on afterwards. Well, it wasn't finished, so she just stuck it in the corner of the gallery, and somebody came along and desperately wanted to buy it. And she did. She sold it. She didn't tell him it wasn't even started yet. She sold it to him straight off for a lot of money. And so what he's got is basically a blank canvas hanging up. You can sell anything nowadays, can't you? You really can. You could sell just about anything. And this story is evidence of that, and the story that I have just told you. Oh my goodness, let me know your input on that. Before I go, and I do have a blooper for you at the end, but before I go to the blooper, I wanted to just read out the inscription that the artist made when he executed Suzanne Valadon's deathbed portrait. I want to read it out to you. It's really quite sweet what he wrote, which proves that she couldn't have been that lonely. She obviously had at least one dear friend who thought very much of her. Suzanne Valadon on her deathbed by Georges Cars. I hope I pronounced that correctly. He's a Czechoslovakian artist. 1880. He died in Geneva, Switzerland, 1945. It's a pencil drawing. Anyway, this is the inscription he wrote. My dear Valadon, this is the first and unfortunately the last drawing that I have made according to you. I think that's somehow lost in the translation. That I have made resembling you, or yeah. He means something along those lines. I hope you will not refuse me the permission to have undertaken it. Forgive me always if I did not do it better, but the emotion grips my heart too much the day that you left us forever. looking at you for the last time, when I try to suppress all my sadness at having lost the friend and to make this ultimate portrait of the master of drawing that you were. Don't be too severe. Thank you always, great and dear friend, and farewell. April the 7th, 1938, between 6 and 7 in the afternoon. Well, what a wonderful tribute that was. How lovely. I do hope someone writes something like that after I snuff it. That was really quite sweet, wasn't it? Anyway, to the blooper, and before the blooper, I'm saying goodbye. And I'll catch you next time, my friends. Take care. God bless. Bye-bye. Oh, the cat. When I construct... fucking cat. When I construct my canvases, I don't know if you can hear this, but the cat is meowing like mad under the gap in the door at the bottom. It's really putting me off. When I construct my canvases, I invent the forms. Bonnie, Boncinelli, fertig.